Okay, well, welcome back. And as promised, we are now joined by a special guest. And well, the name is going to be new to you, but what he does and what he produces isn't going to be new to you because we've been hyping this up and talking about this for quite a number of weeks now. But I'm very pleased to welcome to the show Mr. Magnus Greaves, who is the co-founder and the publisher of the RACEWKND magazine. Magnus, welcome to the show. It's good to see you. I mean, we're covering not only just the lower mainland, Vancouver, BC. We got Mr. Hamilton in Dubai. I mean, it's got a real international flavor.
It's a real international operation. I'm impressed.
Yeah, well, welcome to the show. It's great that you could join us tonight, and it's going to be fun. So, first of all, introduce yourself. Tell us all a little bit about your background and how you got into working and producing content for Formula One before we discuss the magazine itself.
Absolutely. So, I'm from Vancouver, which is terrific, given that you guys are based here as well. I've been into Formula One for quite a long time. I actually lived in London in my 20s and early 30s. And so I was originally introduced to Formula One by my mother back when I was a kid, but I didn't really click back then. But when I moved to London and I was closer to a lot of guys that were big fans, and then I had a chance to go and visit some of the factories and go to a few races, and I was absolutely hooked. But at the time I was involved in the financial industry, and I didn't get into Formula One as a business and making magazines until that part of my career was behind me. So it's been about 6 years being involved making magazines around Formula One.
That's awesome. So when you were living in London, what era would that have been? What was your first introduction? Who were the big names at that time?
You know what? The person that captivated me was Juan Pablo Montoya, and everybody else didn't mean anything. A friend took me to a race. He took me to Monza.
Oh, cool.
We had very special tickets. We were we were in Paddock Club. We were above all the garages, and that was a pretty magical way to take in your first race. Anyway, there was something at the time that really blew me away about Montoya, and so that's when it all started for me.
I know subsequently that the fastest lap of all time has fallen, but for the longest time, JPM held that record. You can go search it up on YouTube. I think it was Monza 2004, and it's basically a lap around the circuit, and you can find it. It is absolutely fantastic. You should go and check it out. It's cool.
I should. That was about the era that I was there, so I should actually look that up. That's a good point.
Yeah. It was really, really cool to see. I watch it occasionally just because the scream of that normally aspirated engine is just it's something that we all miss. But
exactly,
that's awesome. But as you say, you're based in Vancouver as well as are we, and I'm constantly surprised that the undergrounds, the people that fly under the radar that are actually doing meaningful things in relation to Formula One that are based out of this corner of the world. So it's really kind of funny. I mean, when you first got in touch with us, it wasn't until we started talking back and forth. I'm like, well, I could literally just meet up with you and go for a coffee kind of thing. I mean, you just automatically think that everybody doing anything worthwhile is somewhere else.
Well, it's amazing. And my partner at RACEWKND, Tom Brown, I'd seen a different magazine that he had designed, which was related to Formula One, and it was absolutely beautiful. And so I started doing some research. I just thought I have to know who the guy is behind this magazine. And I was very, very surprised to hear that he lived in Port Moody, which is just outside of Vancouver, which is where I grew up and went to school. So to your point, there's a lot of F1 talent here in Vancouver that the world needs to be aware of.
Which in context was, we always tell everybody we live in Coquitlam, which is part of Tri-Cities, which is part of the greater Vancouver area. And Port Moody is also literally just 10 minutes down the road.
That's
so the parallels and all the weird things just, keep popping up all the time. But, let's talk about the magazine now. I mean, in 2021, what was the idea and the motivation to produce a hard copy, big format, like an 11 by 17 size magazine, which is, phenomenal. Excuse me. It's not just something that you can hold in your hands. I mean, well, of course you are, but I mean, it's big enough that it really pulls you in and you just experience it.
Well, it's a couple of things. Formula One is this big, beautiful, amazing sport. And so when we decided to do a magazine, we thought the magazine, the format, the size of it has to be big and beautiful and make an impression as well. So as you said, the size is extra large. and seems to take everybody by surprise, but also the way that we use those pages to fill them up with the images. And of course, we have access to some pretty amazing imagery, creates a real impact. You know, Formula One is a really bizarre sport in certain ways because, you know, as exciting as it is that there's 23 races in 23 different countries, because of that, it also means that it's such a high percentage of the fans that will never attend a race during the season or even in their lifetime. You know, I mean, I think it's got to be 95% or more. So having, you know, there's a lot of great information that comes real time, you know, digitally, and you guys do great podcasts and the like. But I think when there's this physical distance to touching the sport and to going to a race, you know, getting something physical like a magazine, particularly one that is really big and you have in your hands and sort of you get immersed in the pictures, we thought that that would help make a bit of a tangible connection to a sport which otherwise feels very distant for most fans.
Magnus, you made a really great comment a couple of minutes ago when you inferred or implied that Formula One's this bigger than life concept. Like, we talk about the noise and the visceral nature and the speed of these cars. And you're right to capture that via a social media post or to capture that on YouTube or to capture that in a traditional format magazine. It's really challenging. And I think one of the things that I found so astounding about your publication is I hadn't seen it before. Daly did. And he called me that day he got the first copy, and he was super excited to tell me all about it. And he kept explaining it that it was a big format magazine. And like you, like Daly, I grew up in the UK, and the UK has historically had a really strong magazine culture. Like, you go into a WH Smith's at that train station and there's like 50 foot of magazine selection, like the biggest, glossiest magazines. Me too, whether it was Evo or Top Gear or F1. And it's funny, like, even when we were transiting through Heathrow the other day, I nervously went into WH Smith because I'm just like, I hope there's still a beautiful magazine selection. And there was, and I took a photo just for posterity's sake. But great. I think when I got the magazine, that was my initial impression too, is it sits on my lap. It's a showpiece on the coffee table. It's a showpiece on the book or the table. But as I was flipping through it, and I'm a huge photography guy, and some of the folks that you've worked with are the best in the business. But I had an experience looking at some photos, some of which I'd seen before that I did not experience on Twitter. When I see those photos on Instagram or on my 13-inch laptop screen, and then I've suddenly got them in this spread inches away from my face, it was a totally different experience. So as you relate to the reason you went to that format, I can totally understand it. It's not just about, hey, we're going to put some pretty pictures in a book, but we want to create an in-person experience that you can't get digitally.
Exactly. And I think when you hold this oversized magazine and you do lose yourself in the imagery, but also, you know, so much credit to my partner, Tom, who's a design genius. Like, it's not just the great images, it's how he manipulates them and how he sets them, right? And how they're cropped and how they're overlaid. And that enhances the sensation, you know, whether it's of a city or whether it's of a photo of the 1970s, you know, and I think it just helps lose you in it. And you know, he's so great with typography, and when you're reading the magazine, it's not just a straight hold the magazine, flip it. You got to turn it, you got to pull it out and you're sort of really interacting with it, and that's by design. You know, that's to help you sort of get more of an experience out of it, but also just to sort of lose yourself in it, because Formula One is just so full of great imagery, and oftentimes the photos that you see, the cars look slow, or you can't feel the action because it's a picture of a car that is not moving, right? Because it's a static image. But you know, through great design and the layout and the format, I think we're able to bring that to life more.
One of the things that I found going through it, and you just touched on it, is I'm sitting there and I get to the second or third page, and there's just so much there that when you say you get lost in it, I'm not ready to turn the page for 2 or 3 minutes because I keep seeing things. Again, I'm not going to see those things in an Instagram post when I'm scrolling through my feed. They're just going to be lost. But when suddenly it's 10 times the size as my phone screen, you're right, you get lost in those. And I just want to kind of reinforce as well for our listeners at home that I think sometimes take a magazine publication and newspaper design for granted. And back in the early 90s, I remember learning Aldus PageMaker before it became Adobe PageMaker, which became InDesign and all these different concepts. But I remember back then, even 30 years ago, that designing the layout for a book or a magazine, it's an art. It's an absolute art. It's not, you don't just dump a bunch of images into a design product and it spits out what it thinks needs to be done. Like, it's not even so much about choosing the photo because, and I'd love to learn more about this, but you choose a photo and then it's how you place it, how you crop it, how you layer copy on top of that. But very, very cool experience for
we're finishing off the Formula One in the USA issue. So you guys will have to come by and see Tom in action, because the layout and the selection of the photos and the discussion that goes around it is amazing. But, you know, you mentioned Instagram, right? And, you know, when we say magazine, people have an image of a magazine, right? But this is more of a book, I think, than a magazine in a couple of ways.
Totally agree.
I think where people love the visual nature of Instagram, you know, we took that into consideration. So this is a very, very visual magazine, right? So it's sort of, it's an extension there. So I don't know. I feel that that's important. And I also feel that the nature of I mean, there's a lot of print magazines that shouldn't be print magazines. They should be a website. They should be a series of tweets or something, right? Yeah. But if you're going to have a magazine, I think you want to take advantage of that format. And so for us, that means that you'll never throw it away, that you'll display it very, very happily, and that you'll return to it. And this is an important thing to us as well, is that any of our magazines, you can pick them up on any page and just go right in at that point. You know, it's not like, you know, a 7-page written feature and you got to catch it at the beginning. Like, I think that makes it feel special, because every magazine is based around a big topic. So the first one that we put out is Jet Set Formula One, which goes into each of the locations that hosts a Grand Prix, you know, in terms of what happens at the circuit, what happens in the city, and the X factor around it. And then issue number 2 is Formula One in the 1970s. So again, another really big topic that we explore through photography, design, you know, and some big features. But that's important to us, that each one has a very defined theme. Everything inside is about that theme. So when you feel like picking it up and diving in, you can open it anywhere and just go for it.
Yeah, the one thing that I liked when I first read the issue of it was I went through, and it actually took a little while for me to realize that there was text with it as well, because I'm looking at these big, fantastic photos that, you know, I can look at and experience in different ways. And one of the things I love about Formula One, and I'm a big cycling guy, I love professional elite level cycling like the Tour de France, is, you know, the equipment, the colors, and everything that's involved. I mean, when you see the peloton of the Tour de France, all the different colors of all the different riders and the bikes pops out, and Formula One's just the same. Yeah. And you can see all the different colors on the cars, on the track, in the stands, on the drivers' overalls, their helmets, and things like that. And I actually found myself flipping through and enjoying all these different photographs, and then coming back afterwards and then rereading it. And every time I pick it up and I enjoy it in a different way. Sometimes I want to read, you know, what each page is about, what's being there, or do I just want to sit there and enjoy the photography?
Well, and I mean, listen, that's the perfect thing for me to hear, because where we are known for our design and for our imagery, we do have, I feel, really great stories that sort of complement that and dive in. And, you know, to what you're saying there, I think the 1970s issue is really special in that way, because the photographs that we had access to from the archives, I mean, you know, the colors of photos are very different from that era, but also the liveries of cars were very different. You know, the overalls that the drivers wore, you know, colors were used in a different way. So you combine all of those things, and it creates, you can really get lost in that in that visual experience.
And totally. You know, I wanted to ask you now, like, I mean, obviously you've only just released a couple of issues, but what was why now? Like, you know, we're obviously still somewhere in a global pandemic, and, you know, obviously a lot of different businesses have struggled, but I mean, you guys launched this, that notwithstanding.
So in a way we did it because of that. So as I mentioned, I've been making publications around Formula One for about 5 or 6 years. And it was called Rev Journal before, and each issue focused on a location. We did one in Melbourne, we did one in Sochi, we did one in Barcelona, and our distribution strategy was based around the city that was hosting it. But then the pandemic came, and I mentioned before, like 95% of fans, 99% of fans not being able to go to a race. Well, during the pandemic, a lot of things just sort of were different. All of a sudden, 100% of people weren't at a race, right? It's just a little bit different, but it's actually hugely different. And because they weren't at a race, that's not where you were going to do your distribution. So we needed to change and create something that could be sent to people at home. So that changed the format slightly as well, and it changed the editorial nature of it too. And significantly, we also changed the underlying business model. So, you say, why print? Listen, I couldn't agree with you more. Print as a business, as a traditional print magazine is going through the newsstand, is the single worst business model I could possibly think of. So, but print as a product can be beautiful, right? So You got to sort of solve that. And what we did was we studied the direct-to-consumer business models, right, that are so popular and so successful right now. So whether it's Warby Parker and eyeglasses or in particular, Casper and mattresses. Now, hang on a second. If that business model is working for mattresses, those big, bulky things, surely we can adapt that for a nice, flat, beautiful magazine. And that's exactly what we've done. And so, by with certain partnerships and targeted advertising and in Shopify and Amazon, we've now built a product that we can distribute to fans globally, which is really important because Formula One is a global business. But all that inspiration came during the lockdown, So and again, as I was saying before about the distance and trying to bridge that distance, I just felt like having a physical product. And look, us being based in Canada, there's one shop in Canada that sells Formula One merchandise. It's in Montreal. There's one shop in the United States that sells Formula One merchandise. It's in Miami, owned by the guys in Montreal. So there's not a lot of places if we want to go and get our fix that we can go and touch F1 if we're not at a race. And so, that's why we decided to put together a Kickstarter campaign around it as well, because we're all in this experiencing the same thing. And a lot of people came together. And that honestly was one of the best business experiences of my life, was that 30 days of the Kickstarter campaign and putting that issue together, and just the interaction and the support and talking to all the other fans that were experiencing the same thing and that all wanted something to make them feel connected to Formula One. So yeah, that's why we did a print product at that time.
That's outstanding. That's awesome.
I was just going to say, too, I really like your analogy about this reoccurring subscription model, because we see it now. We see it with the Amazon Primes. We see it with toothbrushes. Yep. We see it with razors, and all of these kind of conventional things that have always been less than sexy, and they were this thing you had to pick up at the grocery store, and you were never excited about it. Now people get excited when their Casper mattress arrives or when their Dollar Shave Club razor arrives. And in your case, the term I've used, because I've been talking about this with a couple of friends, is I refer to it less as a magazine, but more as you're subscribing to a book. And maybe talk a little bit about the business model. And obviously, do not get into the financials. But one thing that we haven't talked about so far is your philosophy around advertising inside the magazine. Right. And maybe kind of speak to that and how you landed where you did with that decision.
So this whole rethink of what we're doing and looking at this direct-to-consumer business model, is it a magazine? Is it a book? Is it this? Is it that? What it is it's a brand and it's a relationship, right? And so if I sell a magazine, which I used to do with an old magazine that I had on the newsstand, I have no idea who bought that magazine unless they decide to subscribe. But, that's who knows what's going to happen there. What's most amazing to me about this business model, the efficiency of it, but the fact that every single order that comes in, every person that gets the magazine, I know who they are, and they can have my email, and we can start a relationship. And the fans that I've met has been unbelievable, right? And I should actually mention this too. And talking about the ads first. So because we have this direct-to-consumer business model, and we're not throwing it away via the newsstand, it's a more efficient business model, which means that we don't have to go and sell a ton of ads to support it, right? The fans that are buying it are the ones that are supporting it, which is why I appreciate that direct relationship so much, because it's back and forth. So these issues that we have out at the moment, there's 0 ads in there, right? There's 0 ads. And eventually we might put an ad on the back, but we don't have to. And we can be very picky. We can wait. I mean, I've had some interesting conversations with companies, but unless it's going to be a partnership and enhance what we're doing and play into the bigger picture of what we're trying to do, then there's no point. But you will I tell you this right now, you will never, ever, ever see a bunch of random ads inside the magazine, junking it up and ruining those beautiful pictures. So yeah, that's and again, that's a function of 2 things. It's a function of the direct to consumer business model, and it's also just a function of how much we love this product. And you know, when you get emails all the time from people that read it, that love the look of it, you know, it really, you definitely think twice about putting anything in there that's going to interrupt that.
Yeah, totally right. So you've laid it out nicely, you know, who you are, how you do it. Introduce us and tell us more about some of your team. You already told us about Tom. Who else do you have help putting together this wonderful creation?
Absolutely. So Tom's here in Vancouver as well. Emily Chavis is our managing editor. So she's actually based down in California. She's fantastic. So we all come together, you know, for putting these magazines together, and she handles all of the editing and does a lot of the writing as well. Elizabeth Blackstock is a terrific writer and a huge motorsports fan, and she's been writing a lot of features. So she did a lot of writing in the 1970s issue. Jen Roberts is she works with Tom on the production, which is getting that file ready to get off to the printer, which is something I could never imagine doing without her. So that's incredible. And then on the photography side, Frederick Broden, he's our Swedish photographer that's based in Dallas, that does all of our lifestyle photography. So he travels to the locations in advance and captures, you know, the cities or the lifestyle side, but also, you know, we get access to some really cool locations, like when we were able to photograph the Pirelli factory, or we were able to get access to people's memorabilia collection. So he does a lot of that. Pre-pandemic, Darren Heath, who's a very well-known photographer, great photographer, was at all of the guy's been at every single race for decades. But so with him, we were able to get him to take specific shots at each of the circuits during the race, which is just incredible to be able to have not just access to those shots, but to have a guy of Darren's caliber to be able to do that was amazing. Plus, he has an unbelievable archive of photos that we're able to dive into. So he's been a fantastic partner. And then now we also work with Motorsport Images, which is, you know, the largest database of archive photos. So, you know, our ability to do an issue on the 1970s, and next year we're going to do one in the 1980s.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, having access to their archives is great. So yeah, it's a small team, but just everybody's at the highest possible level.
I'm sort of thinking here. I mean, the 70s would probably be long, flowing mullet type haircuts and big sideburns. So what would the 80s be? Mustaches and aviator sunglasses?
Yeah, I think, and shoulder pads and
shoulder pads. Yeah.
I tell you the thing about the 1970s that gets me the most is the lack of barriers. Right. So fans were flowing onto the circuit. Photographers were walking freely onto the circuit and through the crowds. And like, people were just hanging off of trees. I don't know if people bought tickets back then. Like, and so how that translates into photos is so cool. And then obviously, as you're saying, like the hairstyles and the clothing, and yeah, just some super cool stuff.
Yeah, totally. So you've told us a lot of things about, starting it up, the rewarding and satisfying part of the, running the race weekend. But tell us about some of the challenges that you've had getting this up and running.
So it's a great question. I mean, I think when we originally started, Formula One's a very tough environment to enter because you can't use the term Formula One. You can't use, there's a lot of things you can't say.
Yeah.
Trying to get access to photos, very, very difficult, right? And establish those relationships. We were very fortunate in actually obtaining FIA accreditation fairly early into our existence, which certainly opened things up. And then we were able to have access to the teams. But that's a lot of grinding that goes on with that. I would say now the hardest thing is there's no established channels to sort of put your product in and you're going to sell it, right? You can't just go and sell the product at the circuit. I'm not allowed to do that, right? There's no equivalent of Foot Locker chain or something that you could go and get distribution in. The newsstand is useless. So we have this great direct-to-consumer business model, but still you're constantly having to work it, and it's sort of one at a time. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys and introduce Race Weekend to your audience, because those it's not like there's 40 home basketball games and you can you get 40 shots at it.
Yeah,
there's one Austin race you're not allowed in, and so how do you connect with the fans? So I'd say that's the biggest challenge for us at this point, is to find those moments to engage with fans on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. I mean, especially the access thing. I know in my previous work, not that Major League Soccer's on any par with Formula One, but I mean, when you're not on the inside, it's difficult to get access to, especially like the photography and things like that. But once you're in, it does, you get that foot in the door. It does make a big difference to the stuff that you just, were not privy to before that.
Absolutely. And that's a really great point, because when you're on the outside looking at the business of Formula One, I mean, first of all, I think the three of us look at sports in terms of a North American lens, and we understand how North American sports work.
Yeah.
This isn't a North American sport, and it's also very different in how it's set up. And so I entered it, and I had a business background. So I entered it with certain assumptions of what the business of F1 was. But once you get inside of F1 and you start meeting with race promoters, you start meeting with global sponsors, all of your assumptions are actually wrong. And one of the things that I point out to people that are trying to get into this space, that into F1, is that it's not a consumer first business model like other sports are. It's really a B2B model. I think it's becoming more consumer oriented because of what's happening with Netflix. But as a result of that, a lot of assumptions that you think will happen that will allow your product to be seen and picked up and partnered up, it just doesn't happen in the way that you think it will. So I think overall, when I look at the whole journey, that's been the biggest challenge, figuring that out.
Yeah, well, congratulations to you guys. I mean, you put a lot of hard work into it, and it's great to see not only it's available, but it's sounding like it's starting to build up a bit of head of steam, which is fantastic. And of course, being, a fellow Vancouverite, there's just that extra, wishes on our behalf to see you guys succeed moving forward.
Well, I really appreciate that. Which is why I hounded you guys so much when I found out you were in Vancouver.
Well, I know that goes back almost to the original point that I was making, that it's funny that there's so many people in this neck of the woods, as part of the world, doing these things that you just don't expect that.
You don't expect it. Yep.
Yeah, and you've teased us nicely as well with some of the future editions that are going to be coming out. The 70s one available now, Formula One in the USA, Formula One in the 80s. I mean, there's just so many different paths that you can go down with and such a rich history, which is so cool.
There's a lot of big topics that we can take on, and what I find really great about what's happening at the moment too is Netflix is introduced so many new fans to the sport, and these are fans that want to get up to speed with the context of Formula One, right? And like, if you weren't around watching F1 in the 70s, this is a pretty good way to sort of get caught up to speed. And there's a lot of big topics that we can take, and I think this is the other thing I find interesting is when you're introduced to Formula One from the Netflix show, the emphasis there is on the personalities, the drama, the behind the scenes, the locations. So not everybody is prepared to go from that to looking at timing screens all the time. So we find that a lot of people that have been introduced from Netflix really like, Race Weekend is sort of a next step, or help them with the journey that they're on. So yeah, that's we have a lot of big topics to cover, and we're open to suggestions as well, by the way.
Oh, well, I'm going to have to start making a list.
Well, and the other thing that we do too, and I think you guys have seen some of these, but we did the Beginner's Guide to Formula One. So we were actually commissioned by Formula One to do that, to help with the people that have watched Netflix and help them get comfortable with a lot of the rules and putting a lot of context into it. And then this is the one that we did in Austin. I don't think you guys have seen this one yet.
No, I didn't see that one yet.
Yeah, so that was a guide that we did to the race weekend in Austin, specifically, what happens at the circuit and what happens in the city, whether it's, barbecue or neighborhoods. And, so we're going to start doing a lot more stuff like that as well, really topic-specific guides, and share all of that with the subscribers.
Well, that's awesome. I guess that's also the perfect way as we start to wrap this segment up, Magnus, is let the good people out there know how they can find you guys online, and more importantly, if they feel compelled to do so, and we strongly suggest that they do, if they want to subscribe, where do they do that?
Everything happens at our website, so theraceweknd.com. We have a presence on Instagram where we have so many great photos that we like to try and share them there as well. So that's at the Race Weekend. But yeah, we have a very simple website. The only thing we do is sell that subscription. And like I said, anybody that does subscribe, then it's a much more intimate thing than just buying a random magazine at the newsstand. So, it all funnels through that one place.
Well, that's awesome. Magnus, thank you so very much for joining us tonight. Best of luck. And I hope, obviously continued success with the magazine, but also we didn't even talk about it. I hope you enjoy the rest of the season. It's been an exciting and epic year so far.
So excited about it. Listen, thank you guys both so much. I really appreciate it.